Well, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Teach Climate Network workshop on overcoming climate change disinformation. Feel free to go ahead and turn your cameras on. Always helps create a bit of a sense of community, but do double check that you're on mute. And as we move forward, definitely want this to be interactive. So feel free to just throw things in the chat. I'll kind of monitor that as we move forward. But yeah, again, thank you for joining me. You'll see that we are recording today's session for folks that couldn't join us, but let me know if you have any questions on that. My name is Seth Spencer, and I'm the Teach Climate Network Coordinator for Climate Generation. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm coming to you from Apple Valley, Minnesota, which is on the traditional and contemporary lands of the Dakota and Anishinaabe. Climate Generation does begin every presentation that we deliver with a land acknowledgement. We take time to acknowledge the native land that we are on, because one of the effects of genocide and colonization is that it can be easy to forget that we are still occupying land, and that Indigenous individuals, communities are still alive and leading change in our world. We also recognize the tremendous resilience and innovative climate solutions that are created by these communities and seek to raise up their voices in climate change education. We are proud of the incredible diversity of our country and know that our vision for an equitable future will only be achieved when people work together, bridging experiences and expertise from across the globe. At this time, I would like you to, if you're able to introduce yourselves in the chat, just who you are joining with, what organization or school, and where you're joining from. So I'll give you just a few seconds to do that. Yeah, welcome, Erica. Welcome, Lisa. Welcome. Oh, great. Yeah, welcome, folks. Climate Generation was founded in Minneapolis, Minnesota in 2006 by National Geographic polar explorer Will Steger, seen here. Will is a lifelong science educator, environmentalist, and eyewitness to climate change through 50 years of polar exploration. And Will truly believed that educators were the change makers in our communities. Former science educator, and really believed that personal stories was also the key to creating change across the nation. I'm going to give a quick little background of why Climate Generation is even sharing this workshop series. Our vision is to ignite and sustain the ability of educators, youth, and communities to act on the systems that perpetuate the climate crisis. And we believe we will accomplish this through three overarching strategies guided by our team, which are to overcome disinformation, center anti-racism and systemic equity, and personalize and localize climate change action. So what are we going to be covering today? We're going to jump into talking about climate change science, misinformation, and disinformation. You may hear me kind of throw different terms around, but climate change misinformation would be information, inaccurate information that is shared accidentally, while climate change disinformation is inaccurate information around climate change that is shared purposefully. We'll talk about how do we react to it, how do we identify it, and finally, how to increase our students' media and science literacy to really combat that disinformation. So this won't be too much, but I apologize. I do want to launch a quick poll. around how does climate change misinformation show up in your work? So hopefully you'll be able to see that here. Feel free to take a little time. And do let me know if you're not seeing that Zoom poll, but hopefully everybody can see that. I'm seeing a few answers come in. I'll give folks another minute or so just to respond. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll here. So hopefully you can see that the students confuse causes of global warming with problems of pollution. Recycling as the solution to everything. We can definitely talk about that, where some of that stems from. Students come to discussions with misinformation as if it is fact. Of course, hearing it from parents, even in kindergarten through 5th grade, climate change is not caused by humans. We can talk about that's a fairly common source of misinformation. People are still believing that it's not real, and attempts by industry to influence curriculum and resources. Social media, of course, and just information being shared kind of through different sources. Thanks, everybody. So giving a little bit of context here for what climate generation believes, there's definitely misinformation and disinformation across the United States. If you haven't used it before, Yale Climate Opinion Maps, they try to run it every year to really get a sense of what the nation thinks around climate change and global warming. And so this is kind of an interesting bit of information that 72% of adults in the United States think global warming is happening. Great, we're 70 plus percent, wonderful. But there seems to be definitely a disconnect because only 57% of adults think that global warming is mostly caused by human activities. And so we're already starting off that there is some misinformation or even disinformation out there around the causes of climate change. And so that's where our students are coming into the classroom with that sense. And I'm going to just double check if folks, as they come in, if you can make sure to mute yourself, getting a little bit of background noise. And I apologize for that setting not being on. And then again, about 57% of adults believing that most scientists think global warming is happening. So yes, a consensus, but not anywhere near the amount of people that think that climate change or global warming is actually happening. So today we're going to be really talking about some of the misconceptions around climate change, but really some of the ways that folks that share climate change disinformation actually go about it. There's quite a bit of research on why people want to share science disinformation and really the concepts that they end up using. So we will be talking a little bit about a resource called Skeptical Science from Dr. John Cook and the Flick method that we'll jump into in just a minute. So a pretty common one that I have heard numerous times in the last few years, even by a former president. It's cold, global warming must not exist. Well, then it's dark, the sun does not exist. We'll talk a little bit about that as we continue on. So one maybe benefit of this climate change misinformation, disinformation concept is that it's not new. This is something that has been around probably ever since humans shared information, but really the tobacco industry has been using disinformation around a controversial subject for at least 30, 40 years, and it was very successful at it. There's a lot of money behind it. And unfortunately, the fossil fuel industry has pretty much taken that playbook and used it pretty well. So understanding why people reject climate science offers insight into how they deny science. By better understanding the techniques that they employ, you can counter the misinformation more effectively. So we're going to jump into that FLIC method of science denial, which are really based on 5 main concepts, which are fake experts, logical fallacies, impossible expectations, cherry picking, and conspiracy theories. We're going to watch a short video about those methods.
Based on the evidence, 97 out of 100 climate scientists agree that humans are causing global warming. Despite this overwhelming scientific consensus based on many lines of evidence, a small percentage of the population disagree with the scientists and deny the science. Science denial has 5 telltale techniques. The first technique of denial is fake experts, people who convey the appearance of expertise without possessing relevant expertise. The Global Warming Petition Project lists 31,000 science graduates disagreeing with human-caused global warming, but 99.9% of the people in the petition have no expertise in climate research. That's fake experts in bulk. The second technique of denial is logical fallacies, such as straw man arguments and red herrings. A red herring is a distraction that has nothing to do with the conclusion. For example, arguing that carbon dioxide takes up a small percentage of the atmosphere, so it can't have a strong effect. But we all know examples in everyday life where a tiny amount has a strong effect. Take blood alcohol, for example. The third technique is impossible expectations, like arguing that global warming doesn't exist because it's cold. Cold weather doesn't disappear during global warming, it's just less likely. This argument also commits the fallacy of cherry picking, the fourth technique of denial. It focuses on select bits of information while denying any science you disagree with. How do you tell the difference between misleading cherry picking and appropriate examples? Someone is cherry picking when the conclusion from a small selection of the available data conflicts with the conclusion from the full body of evidence. The last technique is conspiracy theories, the idea that all the world's scientists are in on a global plot. The problem is you can't change the mind of a conspiracy theorist. Show them evidence to disprove their conspiracy, and they'll say the evidence was part of the conspiracy. Facts bounce off their tinfoil hat. That's the 5 techniques of denial: fake experts, logical fallacies, impossible expectations, cherry picking, and conspiracy theories. Knowing these techniques is the first step to building resilience against misinformation and giving science denial the flick.
So we're going to jump into each of those very briefly, but in just a few minutes, we're going to be doing breakout rooms and giving you an opportunity to actually practice some of these methods. And while it might seem like something that you might not have to deal with as an educator, I've seen all of these techniques used, whether it be on social media or I heard a disturbing statistic that about 70% of today's youth have their main source of information via TikTok. And so kind of seeing that social media has that opportunity to inform youth, we have to be aware as educators of how to combat that, but also be a trusted source of information.
Based on the evidence, 97 out of 100 climate scientists agree.
So again, going through those very quickly. In science, should equal voice be given to both sides if 97% of climate scientists agree that climate change is happening? This is I think a pretty important note to start on, because we see that a lot of information is shared that scientists don't agree that climate change is actually happening. there's a report that is currently trying to be published that climate change never actually existed, and that we've been sharing inaccurate information for 20 years. The problem is that not a single author of that report is a climate scientist. There's a very broad range of what a scientist is, or what a doctor is. And we get continued information being shared by folks that don't have the professional or research background in climate change research. Again, logical fallacies of user errors or absence of facts or context to draw false conclusions. So things like red herrings and jumping to conclusions, false dichotomies. Impossible expectations. This is a really common one that I see shared by adult, youth, social media, demanding precision in climate reports or climate forecasting. We know that folks trying to predict weather have a very low percentage of actually getting it correct day to day. And so many folks believe that a climate scientist should be able to predict that climate change will do this to a certain region in the next decade. And so if there's any change in that, too much ice, not enough ice is melting, holding that everything else that they've predicted must be wrong as well. Cherry picking, things like parts of the Antarctic are gaining ice, or that parts of Greenland are gaining ice. Yes, there are very small parts, just like a former governor of Alaska used some cherry picking to say that Alaskan glaciers are advancing. One glacier in the entire state was advancing and every other one was receding. And then finally, conspiracy theories, calling climate change or global warming the greatest scam in history, and that it's really just to make people money that have invested in green technology. Okay. So we're going to take a little time in breakout rooms to actually talk about how do these show up and see if you all are successful in being able to identify the technique that people have used. In order to have this work, I'm going to give you access to this slide deck. I'm going to be putting in the chat right now. And when you get in there, you're going to want to go to slide 21, which is where I currently am. And in just a moment, I'll be sending you into breakout rooms. I understand that some folks might be busy doing other things. Feel free to keep your video off if you're not able to interact, but hopefully you'll be able to turn your video on and be able to introduce yourself, and then kind of go through these next few slides and actually look at how do we actually know what technique is being used, because it's important to identify that and be able to share with our students. So yeah, thanks for folks. If you're not able to participate, you can just send me a quick message and I'll leave you out of a breakout room. But I'm going to stop sharing and then send you to those breakout rooms very quick. As we go through these, feel free to just put what your group's best guess was for these different scenarios. And then I'll kind of back up what the Flick method would say. So statement number one, the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine causes autism, which was published by Andrew Wakefield, MD, paper published in 1998, that continues to be shared across the world. What are folks? Okay, so we've got some cherry picking, fake experts as a guess. Cherry picking. Yeah, this one is definitely fake expert. His research was paid by vaccine injury lawyers. The paper was retracted, and the actual research that he supposedly did was not repeatable. Okay. Number two, living in this area, we need four-wheel drive, so I can't drive a hybrid car. I see a couple guesses in there already. Anybody else have a guess? Give you a second to put that in the chat if you'd like. I'm just gonna make sure folks are muted. Feel free to unmute yourself, but just getting a little background noise. Impossible expectations. Good guess. This one is going to be a logical fallacy, a false dichotomy, or red herring. Yeah, nicely done. Number 3, I've met 2 nice people from Green Bay, so everyone there must be great. Cherry picking, good guesses. I've seen a couple different ones, cherry picking, false dichotomy. This one is probably going to best fit in that general term of logical fallacy, jumping to conclusions. So 2 sets of data, making a conclusion off of that. That one is shared quite a bit. We set record-breaking cold, must not be getting warm. Seatbelts are dumb, people still die in car crashes. Saw another couple guesses. Yeah, and I'll definitely reshare the link to this in just a second, so you all have that. Oh, and I apologize, I did not copy that correctly. I'll do that one more time. So number 4 is impossible expectations. Again, believing that somebody's going to get something exactly right, especially when we're talking about climate forecasting. The Earth is just a few thousand years old, published by Ken Hom, Bachelor's of Science with minor in Environmental Science. Yeah, and I think I saw a couple general comments there. Yeah, fake expert or misrepresentation. And then finally, crop circles can't be made by humans, so they must be made by aliens. That one definitely falls into our conspiracy theory. And while that was kind of a bit of an over-the-top example, we'll see maybe another one here shortly. So a couple other quick climate misinformation, disinformation statements. Any global warming is just natural variability. The Earth is billions of years old. This is just a short phase. We don't have to worry about global warming since humans always evolved to solve their problems. It's too late to stop climate change, but a technological fix is bound to come along. The first part of that statement is definitely something that is quite commonly shared now. We talked about at the beginning that Yale Climate Opinion Map, 70% of the population in the United States believes that climate change is happening. So most of the population believe climate change is happening. What we're now getting into, and that I've been seeing shared quite a bit, is that, okay, it's happening, but there's nothing we could possibly do about it. So there's no reason to possibly stop fossil fuels or spend more money on green technology. And I think this is going to be an important one for today's youth. Is I always have to remind myself of this as somebody in their 30s has seen climate change happening. Today's youth, climate change just is. It is part of their reality. And when they constantly see messages about it, they can easily go to, well, there's nothing I could possibly do about it. And I think that's a big message that is being shared by the fossil fuel industry, but definitely by lots of folks, that there's nothing humans could possibly do to stop what is currently happening. And so it just stops action. Again, a couple other statements. Climate is always changing. We've had ice ages and warmer periods. Ice ages have occurred in a 100,000-year cycle for the last 700,000 years. So this was a statement from Senator Marco Rubio, not that long ago. Just wondering if anybody has a guess of what Flick method Senator Rubio was using. This was definitely a logical fallacy and a jumping to conclusion, and is not actually based on climate data or trends. This is one from, I believe, 2019. President Trump tweeted about cold weather in New York. In the East, it could be the coldest New Year's ever on record. Perhaps we could use a little bit of global warming. So the type of misinformation, and we talked about this already, definitely some cherry picking, using personal experience or an isolated example instead of actual compelling evidence. Oh, I apologize. Yes, I know that I'm not presenting full screen. I can definitely do that. Sometimes it's helpful. And you all have access to the shared notes. So definitely want to make sure that you have access to the full thing, and I will be sending a follow-up on this. Renewables like solar or wind are not enough to actually solve climate change. This is definitely, again, going back to that inaction, not doing anything, and is, again, quite commonly used by fossil fuel industry or politicians. This is deliberately diverting attention, so logical fallacy. And then I'm going to share a few social media posts that have been shared by thousands of folks over the last few years to, again, just talk about how easily it is for not only our students, but other educators, members of our community, to really have this misinformation and disinformation shared. So this is one that has been shared over the last 5 years and in a couple of different ways. So we've got a mine where lithium is extracted for electric car batteries, and then a good old oil sand site in Alberta. And then tell me more about how electric cars are better for the environment. This is also one that the Exxon pipeline has been used. Line 3 in Minnesota has been used in the same sort of thing. And again, false equivalency or red herring. Definitely using one extreme example, and that's not actually, unfortunately, even a lithium mine. I believe it's a copper mine. And then only showing an oil sand site that nothing has gone wrong. This is one that's really relevant today because we have the COP37, or the Conference of the Parties in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, coming up in about 6 weeks. And I personally really struggle with this one as somebody that really talks about climate change and reducing our carbon emissions. And then we have this huge amount of airline travel and everything. But again, this is used quite a bit to just say that no action should be taken around climate change. And I think this is an interesting one to talk about with students to really see, yeah, it's definitely a battle. We definitely have to think about how do we actually take action, and is an individual action of maybe not flying going to stop climate change? Maybe, if millions or even billions of people do it, but probably not that one-off action. And this one is just from about a month ago. I was talking about that report, the World Climate Declaration, that there is no climate emergency. And we have a senator from Australia that shared it, and I think it got about 80,000 likes. And again, this is where, when you look at the authors, there's not a single climate scientist authoring that report. It's just important to know where we're getting that information from. So really thinking about, what do we do when misinformation shows up? We've got this one that was shared quite a bit in Canada. Heat spills are not new. We've had warmer trends throughout even the last 100 years. And so when we see these things on social media, I think as educators, it's really important for us to challenge students. Is this a trusted source, or can we talk about it in a trusted space, this classroom, of why would somebody be sharing this information? What do they have to benefit? And how do we back it up? Where is the data to possibly support that? And it's incredibly tricky, but important for us to really push that conversation forward and ask students, can you back up that statement when disinformation or misinformation shows up? I saw early on when we asked, where does misinformation most commonly pop up? Families. And that's, I think, as an educator, the hardest thing to really discuss. I know in my background as an educator, it's not really my place to challenge what families are telling students, but to really give them the sources of trusted information and say, this is where scientists have been putting the research. This is what the data shows. What do you possibly think about it? I show this because we just looked back at this statement. There have been heat spells in the past. Something like 90 years ago was hotter than it ever is now. Well, the data doesn't support that. When we look at the 10 hottest global years on record, all 10 are in the last 15 years. So some of this is really easy to push back on and really say, well, that's not true. Why would somebody be saying that? And again, when we look back at the last 150 years, yes, there have been cooler periods. There have been periods that have only been a little bit above the average trend. But when we look again at the last 2 decades, warmest years on record. And I think it's also important, I think as educators, we know this information of where students get information, how they share information. I mentioned TikTok has not caught up or been included in this one, but just social media is way up there, face-to-face, families, but really thinking about how do we get things like printed magazines, newspaper, is that how we're going to change students' minds? Probably not. But really, how do we get that discussions with teachers a little bit higher on an actual trusted source of information? I am going to talk a little bit for just the next few minutes about that this conversation is not new. To really think about how long has disinformation around climate change been shared. So I'm going to challenge you a little bit. Anybody have a guess? You can put it in the chat there of what year this ad is from. So each day, Humboldt supplies enough energy to melt 7 million tons of glaciers. So this is pushing back around climate change. Anybody have a guess what year this is from? Ooh, I've got 75, 65, 82, 50. Man, some good guesses. This is from 1962. And 3 years earlier, in 1959, America's oil bosses had warned that burning fossil fuels could lead to global heating, sufficient to melt the ice cap and submerge New York. And that is what this ad is referring to. Okay. Here are 2 op-eds published in the New York Times. And the first one does have a date on it, if you can see that. But any guesses when the last time Mobile ran these op-eds in the New York Times? What year? Give folks just a second. Okay, 1993. I don't know if Julia just Google this super quickly, but that is exactly right. This was last published in 1993. Mobil and ExxonMobil ran one of the most comprehensive climate denial campaigns of all time, and used these climate advertorials, which appeared again in the New York Times and other newspapers, were part of what scholars were calling the longest regular use of media to influence public and elite opinion in today's America. Okay, we're getting a little bit more into the social media world. Some posts from BP. We've now moved away from climate denialism to that really fossil fuel industries are actually taking action, and that really that it's all up to us. It's all up to individual action to stop or change climate change. Oh, nice, Juliet. Knew the font type. Okay, any guesses on this one? Okay, 2005. Okay. Will, you're 1 year off. This is 2006. Big oil has evolved from outright denial to actually shifting the responsibility away from companies onto consumers. And this has been something that really hasn't changed I would say in the last 15 years. Is there's talked about how everything's about recycling. Well, when unfortunately we really stop to think about it, recycling is not going to get us out of the climate change issue. We're not going to really be stopping carbon emissions all that much. Yes, there is personal action that can be involved, but really moving beyond that to actually stopping industry-wide movement, and probably on both a national and international scale. Again, climate scientists, even if everybody did everything they could, we'd probably at most fix about 40% of the problem. Yep, definitely calculating your carbon footprint was a big thing, still is a big thing. I see it shared quite a bit. Okay, we're gonna watch a very quick.
I always loved solving problems as a kid. I was very into science and maths. I loved to dream about all the things that were possible. So my kids, they just think I talk to people all day. I say I work in renewable energy, and they go to me, "What does that mean, Mummy?" But then I talk about the solar panels you see on people's roofs, the big wind turbines you see when you're going down a motorway. I help the energy that those things produce get into people's homes. We want to bring 100% renewables to the UK grid. For me, I see the energy transition as being a hugely exciting part of the future. All of us in our homes, all of us in our small businesses may be producing our own energy. It's really important for me that I look back in 10 years' time and I see I've made the future far cleaner and far better for our children.
Kat and her team's determination is bringing increasing amounts of renewable electricity to the UK grid.
Wonderful. So inspiring what Shell is doing. Unfortunately, between 2010 and 2018, 99% of Shell's investment were in oil and gas. And these types of misrepresentations are industry-wide. Yeah, they're quite common, these types of ads, unfortunately. I
always loved solving problems as a kid.
So in the last just 3 or 4 minutes, I do want to share some resources to take this conversation beyond necessarily how to identify it, how to spot it, but really helping students even have a better sense of digital literacy. And so that you can take these back to and possibly use within your classrooms or organizations. And I'll be sending, again, a follow-up email with all of these resources, but kind of some big ones that Climate Generation continues to use are things like Cranky Uncle, Skeptical Silence, which is a pretty fun app to mess around with, Learning for Justice, CBC and PBS have some pretty great resources, Thinking is Power, and Resisting Science Misinformation. And then Common Sense Education, Media Literacy Now, and Edutopia all have pretty wonderful resources. And in the notes section, there's direct links to all of those talking about climate change, misinformation, disinformation. And then Climate Monitor also pushes out pretty much a weekly kind of debrief of where money is being spent around climate change communication. And this one's really interesting because we can see both lots of money being spent to really talk about how climate change is happening, but also a fair amount of money around climate change disinformation. And then in case you missed it, back in the spring, the PBS did a pretty great documentary on the power of big oil, and still available to watch. 3 different parts. And then Climate Generation does run the Teach Climate Network. This workshop is one part of that. The network includes workshops, monthly newsletters, and of course, curriculum. And so you have a link to the network. We are going to have another workshop here in a month on October 19th, led by awesome Kathy Techman with the University of Wisconsin Extension, really talking about how to weave together traditional ecological knowledge and science for climate education and really climate action. And again, the link will be in that slide deck. Climate Generation has put out a brand new resource on becoming a climate change educator, just published last month. Really great if you're just stepping into the world of climate change education. And we won't do this activity, but just something to think about. Activity, idea, or concept you'd be excited to share with the youth that you work with, or the learners that you work with. Oh, yeah, Will, thanks for sharing those resources. I'll definitely add that into the resources that I send out in an email. And folks, that is where I will stop in the last 5 minutes. Definitely want to share an opportunity for any questions you have or comments, but overall, thank you so much for joining us for today's Teach Climate Network workshop. Feel free to sign off, but again, I'll be sending out the recording, resources, and this slide deck probably within the next few days. So yeah, Will, go ahead, unmute yourself if you'd like.
Hey, great workshop. I had an interesting question, and I don't know if this is the right space to talk about it, but I've created online climate change topic content on YouTube, and I'm kind of curious if you have any thoughts on, like, in this responding to climate denial and science denial, like how to respond in comments to this kind of thing, because we're talking about, like, having conversations with classrooms, but I know a lot of content and education happens over the internet and not face to face. And I know, like, organizations like Complexly that runs SciShow, and so many other great YouTube channels that talk about a lot of this kind of content of how to respond to climate denial type topics and comments in, like, comment sections.
Ooh, well, that's a hard one, because what Climate Generation really believes about climate change communication is that, yes, having scientific data to support your whatever you're talking about is important, but really it comes down to trusted relationships. And so that's why we say localizing climate change action. That really, me here in Minnesota sharing this information is great, love doing it, but a student maybe in California is not going to just say, oh yeah, Seth, Climate Generation, he must know what he's talking about. It's going to be another organization that they either have previous experience with, know somebody, oh yeah, that's from LA, yeah, they must have the up-to-date information. And so when we think about how to do that in a virtual world, that is really challenging. So if anybody has any tricks or techniques for Will, definitely feel free to throw that in the chat. I'll think about that a little bit more and try to respond in that resource follow-up email as well. But it is challenging knowing that students, well, both that educators and students get most of our information through the digital world. And that sometimes I'm not very good at even like fact checking what I'm seeing. Like Facebook is sending me all this great information about climate change action. And sometimes I don't take the time to really like, where's it coming from? I definitely go down the rabbit hole of comments and like, oh yeah, that person must know what they're talking about. I think it's definitely giving whoever's responding some additional resources, but how often do we actually click on the link to click on the link? So I think the more opportunities, the more resources we can put out there. But again, I think it comes down to that trusted partner of who's sharing that information. Is it the educator? Is it the family member or somebody? Like, who's sharing it? Do they trust that person? Yeah. So don't have a great answer, but I'll definitely think about that a bit more. Any other questions? Yeah, definitely seeing that folks are throwing in some additional resources. I'll quickly take note of those and we'll send those out.
As people think, if just pointing this out, Seth, as you're developing this workshop, if you want like snippets of things that people have put in my YouTube comments of total science denial stuff, I'm happy to send that over because it's been wild.
Yeah, definitely feel free to send them my way. I see that kind of stuff. Like I go through Climate Generation's Twitter account every once in a while, and it's always interesting of where people feel like they need to spend the energy to share climate change disinformation. But it's definitely rampant, unfortunately. And some of it I want to think is just misinformation, but then just like knowing, I don't know if it's like 30% of all Twitter accounts are bots, and knowing that there's that amount of money being shared to spread disinformation is a little disheartening. So yeah, I don't know, Will, if you saw that, if you want to can share your YouTube link there quick, but I'll stay on for another minute or two. But yeah, thanks everybody for joining me today. Have a great rest of your day.